Hello, thanks for joining me for this little tutorial. This is actually a follow-up tutorial on an activity I did with some Year 11 students on their skills for fashion design in Photoshop. So if you weren't part of that activity, then some of this probably won't make a whole lot of sense, but welcome. So we've opened up our file that we were using, and we've looked at the layers palette. So that's where we're going to continue to work. And notice I've got my croquis at the bottom layer, and then I've already filled my jacket in, or part of my jacket in, with a color. There's the layer for my shirt. Now I'm going to show you how you can change the color of any of your layers without having to use the paint bucket again. We've already used the paint bucket to fill in a solid color or a block color, and we've already used a custom design stamp to paint in a fabric. So I've made my own texture already for the shirt, and I've already painted that in, and we looked at that in the workshop. But let's say I didn't want the blue and I wanted to change the color of that fabric. Well, if I now use the paint bucket, because of all this texture, the paint bucket is not going to do a good job for me because I've got texture there. So I'm going to change what's called the hue and the saturation. To do that, first of all, left click on your layer that you want to change, single left click. Then down under the bottom of the screen, you've got what looks like, I guess, a half colored in black and white circle or a black and white cookie. Maybe if I click on that once, I get a whole bunch of changes that I can make to that layer. You can experiment with some of these changes later on, but I just want to show you hue and saturation. So the word hue, that simply means color, and the word saturation describes how much of that color is present. So I'm going to left click on that, and you'll notice straight away on my layer that I have got what's called a layer mask. That's been created automatically by the action I just did. And now in the properties dialog box, or the properties tab of hue and saturation, you can see I've got three sliders: hue, saturation, and lightness. So let's first of all play with the hue slider. This arrow is pointing right in the middle there, and I usually start off right in the middle, and it's pointing to that blue color. All right, if I drag this, then you'll notice as I drag the slider, the color of my fabric, in fact, all the colors are changing, and I'll tell you why in a second. But as I'm changing the slider, I can also change the colors that I've already got on my image. So that's what the hue slider does. Now you can either grab the slider to change it, or you can left click in that box and type in a number. You can see it goes from 0 in the middle to minus 180 up to plus 180. If I change the saturation, so let's say now we're just looking at the shirt at the moment. Let's say I really like this kind of a purple color. And I happen to know that it's plus 83. I can note that down in my project if I want to record the numbers. Let's look at what the saturation does. If I grab the saturation slider and move it to the left, what it does is it takes out that purple. It becomes less and less purple until now my whole image is gray because I've removed all the color from my image. Okay, if I increase the slider now beyond the 0 point, then the amount of color or the saturation level of that color increases. Okay, so that gives me some more control there. Let's have a look at lightness. You can probably guess what lightness does. If I move it to the left, my whole image gets darker and darker and darker. If I move it to the right, my whole image gets lighter and lighter. Okay. All right, let's put it back in the middle. So I can change my entire image. In fact, if I look back at my layers palette again, here, this clipping mask, or this mask, layer mask, is sitting above my shirt and it's sitting above my jacket, which means at the moment, everything below this hue saturation mask is being impacted. Okay. But I just want the shirt to be affected. So what I need to do is right click on the layer mask, and it gives me the option to create a clipping mask. Now the clipping mask, if I left click, the clipping mask now clips it to just the shirt layer, which means now only the items on the shirt layer are going to be affected. And I can see that's been clipped because you notice the word shirt has now got an underline, and the hue and saturation have now got a chain. Okay, they weren't there before. So now I can change the color of my shirt and the jacket stays exactly the same. So let's give him a brown. That's too much brown. Let's reduce the brown a little bit, but let's make the brown a bit lighter. So now I have completely changed the color and the lightness of my shirt, and I haven't impacted anything else. Now it's your turn. Why don't you go and open up the file that we created at the workshop and start with changing the hue and the saturation. Remember, because it's a video, you can now replay the video from the very beginning and go through all these steps yourself. Thanks for joining me, and feel free to leave a comment if you have a YouTube account below and tell me if this was helpful or if it was useful for you. Thanks a lot.